The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Johannesburg sky in hues of deep purple and fiery orange. Inside a sleek apartment in Sandton, two sisters stood in front of a large mirror, their reflections eerily identical yet worlds apart in essence. Zanele and Zinhle. Twins by birth, but as different as night and day. Zanele was the epitome of grace. With smooth, dark skin that glowed in the dim lighting, her neatly braided hair cascaded over her shoulder in a simple yet elegant style. Her warm brown eyes carried a quiet wisdom, and her posture was always poised, her demeanor composed. She dressed modestly but stylishly, tonight, in a fitted emerald green dress that hugged her curves tastefully. Zinhle, on the other hand, was the fire to Zanele's calm waters. Though they shared identical features, Zinhle carried herself with a boldness that made people notice her even before she spoke. Her makeup was sharper, her clothes tighter, her lips often painted in a daring shade of red. She thrived on attention and the power it gave her. Tonight, they were preparing for a special dinner. "You're glowing," Zinhle teased, watching Zanele adjust her dress in the mirror. "It must be because you're seeing Loverboy tonight." Zanele smiled, a deep dimple appearing on her left cheek. "I can't help it, Zinhle. Thabo makes me so happy." Thabo. The name rolled off Zanele's tongue with so much love, so much certainty, that it made Zinhle pause. She had met Thabo before, of course, he had been in her sister's life for 2 years now. A successful businessman with a sharp mind and an effortless charm, Thabo was the kind of man who turned heads when he entered a room. Tall, dark, and commanding, with a voice like smooth velvet and a smile that could disarm even the coldest of hearts. Zinhle had always found him attractive, but until now, she had never really thought about him. Not like this. She turned to her sister with an amused smirk. "You sound like you're already married to the guy." Zanele laughed, adjusting her earrings. "Maybe one day, I will be." A strange emotion flickered in Zinhle's chest. She ignored it. Dinner with the devil. The restaurant was luxurious, bathed in golden light, with soft jazz playing in the background. The moment Thabo arrived, his eyes locked onto Zanele as if she was the only woman in the room. "You look breathtaking," he murmured, his voice low and full of admiration. Zanele blushed as he leaned in to kiss her cheek. "Thank you, my love." Zinhle watched the exchange, sipping her wine with a slow smirk. It wasn't jealousy. No, it was something else. Curiosity. A dangerous, intoxicating curiosity. She had seen many men adore her sister before, but this was different. There was something about Thabo, the way he carried himself, the confidence in his every move, the way his eyes darkened slightly when he was deep in thought. She wanted to test something. Just a little. "Thabo, I heard you closed another business deal," Zinhle said smoothly, interrupting their private moment. "Tell me, how do you always win?" Thabo turned to her, amused by the question. "It's all about knowing the right people and taking risks at the right time." Zinhle tilted her head, her red lips curving into a slow smile. "Risk-taking. That's what separates the bold from the ordinary, right?" Thabo chuckled, nodding. "Exactly." Their eyes locked for just a second longer than necessary. Zinhle caught it. That brief flicker of something, interest? Curiosity? Zanele, oblivious, was scrolling through her phone for a moment and didn't notice the energy shift. By the time dinner ended, Zinhle was certain of one thing: she wanted more of Thabo's attention. And she was going to get it. The first step into temptation. A week later, Zanele called Zinhle in a panic. "Sis, I have an emergency at work. Thabo was supposed to pick me up for dinner, but I can't leave now. Can you please go and meet him at the lounge? I'll join you later." Zinhle smirked, biting her lower lip. "Of course, sis. Anything for you." She arrived at the lounge dressed in a fitted black dress that clung to her like a second skin, her braids styled into a high bun. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she walked in, her confidence undeniable. When Thabo looked up and saw her, his expression shifted. He recovered quickly, but Zinhle saw it, the slight widening of his eyes, the quick inhale before he spoke. "Zinhle," he greeted, standing up. "I almost thought you were Zanele for a second." Zinhle laughed softly, slipping into the seat across from him. "We get that a lot, but I assure you, we're very different." Thabo chuckled, ordering drinks. "I can tell." They talked about business, life, ambition. Zinhle found herself fascinated by him, not just by his looks, but by his mind. He was sharp, strategic, always calculating his next move. And the way he looked at her? It was subtle, but there was something there. Something he wasn't saying. Zinhle leaned forward slightly, letting her voice drop to a lower, more intimate tone. "Tell me, Thabo," she whispered, "do you ever wonder what it would be like if we had met first?" Thabo stiffened. His grip on his glass tightened. For a moment, it seemed like he would shut it down. But then, he looked at her. Really looked at her. And in that moment, Zinhle knew, she had just set something in motion that neither of them could stop. The aftermath of the first spark. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The tension between them grew, silent yet screaming. By the time Zanele finally arrived, Thabo was distant, quieter than before. He kissed her cheek, but his touch lingered. His mind was elsewhere. Zinhle saw it. She felt it. Later that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she smiled to herself. This was just the beginning. The morning after that electrifying dinner, Zinhle couldn't shake off the way Thabo had looked at her. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and most of all, undeniable. She had seen hesitation in his eyes, but she had also seen interest. A spark, just waiting for the right moment to turn into an uncontrollable fire. She smirked to herself as she scrolled through her phone, fingers hovering over Thabo's name. Should I text him? No. That would be too forward. Instead, she did something better. She sent a picture to Zanele, a simple mirror selfie of herself in a silk robe, the lighting making her skin glow flawlessly. She knew her sister would likely show it to Thabo. He was always telling Zanele how beautiful she was, and she loved to brag about it. Sure enough, an hour later, an unexpected notification lit up Zinhle's screen. "Thabo, that's quite a picture." Her lips curled into a slow smile. Hooked. She let a few minutes pass before replying. "Zinhle, you weren't supposed to see that. But since you did you like it?" A full 5 minutes passed before Thabo finally responded. "Thabo, your trouble, Zinhle." She laughed softly. She already knew that. Suspicion creeps in. Meanwhile, Zanele was completely unaware of the fire her sister was playing with. She adored Thabo and had already started dreaming about their future, marriage, children, a life built on love. She spoke about him constantly, and Zinhle pretended to be the supportive sister, listening intently while secretly stirring the pot behind the scenes. One evening, as they sat in their apartment, Zanele sighed dreamily. "Thabo has been a little distracted lately," she admitted. "He says it's just work, but I feel like his mind is somewhere else." Zinhle sipped her wine, masking her amusement. "Oh, sis, if only you knew." "I'm sure it's nothing," Zinhle said smoothly. "Men get like that when they have a lot on their plate." Zanele nodded. "You're right. He's not the type to cheat." The irony almost made Zinhle laugh. "I should surprise him at work," Zanele continued, her eyes bright with excitement. "I can bring him dinner." Zinhle's heart skipped a beat, but she maintained her composure. "Maybe give him space, though. If he's stressed, he might just need some time to breathe." Zanele frowned slightly, but she nodded. Maybe you're right. Zinhle let out an internal sigh of relief. That was close. But she knew she couldn't afford any more near misses. Temptation turns to fire. The next time Zinhle saw Thabo, it wasn't by accident. She had found out that he was working late at his office and decided to surprise him. Dressed in a fitted wine-colored dress that accentuated every curve, she walked into his office with 2 cups of coffee in hand. The receptionist barely batted an eye as she strode past. People always confused her and Zanele, an advantage she had every intention of using. When she reached Thabo's office, she knocked once before pushing the door open. Thabo looked up, momentarily stunned. Zinhle. What are you doing here? She shrugged, stepping closer and placing the coffee on his desk. Thought you might need a little pick-me-up. He hesitated before reaching for the cup. You didn't have to. But I wanted to. The air between them was thick, charged. She walked around his desk, standing behind him, close enough for him to feel the heat of her body. She placed a hand on his shoulder, leaning in slightly. You work too hard, she murmured, her fingers grazing his neck lightly. You need to learn to relax. Thabo inhaled sharply. Zinhle, this is wrong. Is it? She whispered, her breath warm against his skin. Or are you just afraid of what you really want? His muscles tensed beneath her touch. He was struggling, fighting himself. Zinhle smirked. Good. That meant she was winning. She leaned closer, her lips just inches from his ear. I see the way you look at me, Thabo. He turned sharply, his eyes dark. Zinhle, don't. But she only tilted her head, holding his gaze. What are you afraid of? His jaw clenched. Zanele. A flicker of annoyance crossed Zinhle's face, but she covered it quickly with a slow, knowing smile. Then why haven't you pushed me away? Silence. For a moment, she thought he would crack. But then, with a deep breath, he pulled away, standing up abruptly. You should go, he said, his voice low, almost strained. Zinhle pouted playfully but didn't push further. Not yet. Instead, she smirked and picked up her purse. Suit yourself, Thabo. But we both know this isn't over. With that, she sauntered out, leaving behind the scent of her perfume and the lingering weight of temptation. Lines begin to blur. That night, Zinhle left the office with the scent of Thabo's cologne clinging to her skin and the thrill of a game well played. She didn't kiss him. Not yet. But she had left him with something worse, doubt. And doubt was a dangerous seed. By the time she got home, she found Zanele humming as she cooked dinner. Thabo called, Zanele said happily. He sounded a little off, but I think it's just stress. Zinhle bit her lip, pretending to be indifferent. I'm sure it is. But inside, she knew better. She had gotten into his head. And now, there was no turning back. The breaking point. Days passed, and the tension only grew. Thabo tried to act normal around Zanele, but she started noticing the small changes, how he hesitated before kissing her, how he seemed lost in thought more often than usual. One evening, as they sat in his apartment, she turned to him suddenly. Are you okay? He blinked, surprised. What? You've been acting weird lately, she said, frowning. Like, distracted. Thabo exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. It's just work, Z. A lot going on. She studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. Okay, but if something's wrong, you'll tell me, right? Of course. Lies. And Zinhle knew it. Because that same night, as she lay in bed, she got a message from Thabo. Thabo, we need to talk. Her heart skipped a beat. A slow smile spread across her lips. Finally. A seed of doubt. Zinhle stood in front of the mirror, tilting her head slightly as she applied a deep shade of lipstick. Her fingers moved slowly, precisely. The woman staring back at her had the same face as Zanele, yet she was different, bolder, more daring. Her phone buzzed. "Thabo, we need to talk." A slow smile spread across her lips. Finally. She had spent weeks planting seeds of doubt in Thabo's mind, subtly showing him what he was missing. A stolen glance here. A lingering touch there. A laugh that was just a little too soft, a look that lasted a little too long. She picked up her phone and typed back. "Zinhle, when and where?" "Thabo, tomorrow night. My place. When Zanele is at her cousin's bridal shower." Zinhle's heart leapt in victory. Perfect. She set her phone down and turned back to the mirror, studying her reflection. You always get what you want, Zinhle. And now, she wanted him. An invitation to sin. The next evening, Zinhle carefully selected her outfit. She settled on a simple yet provocative black silk dress that clung to her body in all the right places. Understated, yet impossible to ignore. She let her long, wavy hair fall down her back, running her fingers through it as she exhaled slowly. No turning back now. The drive to Thabo's apartment felt like forever, her heart pounding with anticipation. When she finally arrived, she knocked softly, waiting. The door opened. Thabo stood there, his expression tight, his dark eyes filled with emotions he was clearly struggling to suppress. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then he stepped aside, allowing her in. She walked past him, her perfume filling the small space. She heard the door click shut behind her, the sound final. "Drink?" Thabo asked, his voice rough. Zinhle turned to him, leaning against the counter. "Are you trying to calm your nerves?" His jaw tightened. "I don't know why I asked you to come." She tilted her head, studying him. "Yes, you do." Thabo exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. "This, whatever this is, this game you're playing, needs to stop." Zinhle raised an eyebrow. "Game? You know exactly what you're doing," he said, stepping closer. "You've been pushing me. Testing me." Zinhle's lips curled into a slow smile. "And?" Thabo let out a frustrated breath. "And it's working." She took a step toward him. "Then stop fighting it." He swallowed hard. "Zinhle." She reached up, trailing a finger along his jaw. "Tell me you don't feel it." Thabo didn't answer. His breathing was uneven, his chest rising and falling too quickly. She leaned in closer, her lips brushing his ear. "Tell me you don't think about me when you're with her." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You're my girlfriend's sister," he whispered, almost as if he were trying to remind himself. Zinhle smirked. "And yet, here we are." There was a moment of silence. A split second where Thabo could have walked away. But he didn't. Instead, he grabbed her. His lips crashed against hers, his hands pulling her flush against him. It was fire. It was hunger. It was every forbidden thought they had both tried to ignore. Zinhle melted into him, her hands threading through his hair as he backed her against the wall. His grip was firm, possessive. For a moment, nothing else existed. No guilt. No betrayal. Just raw, desperate need. Guilt and temptation. The moment it was over, reality came crashing down. Thabo pulled away, running a shaky hand through his hair. His face was a mixture of regret and something else, something darker. "What the hell did we just do?" he muttered. Zinhle smirked, her lips swollen from his kisses. "What we wanted." Thabo turned away, gripping the edge of the table. "Zanele." Zinhle rolled her eyes. "You always say her name right after touching me." Because she's my girlfriend, Zinhle. Thabo snapped, his voice thick with guilt. Zinhle walked up behind him, placing a hand on his back. Then why did you kiss me back? He tensed. This was a mistake. Zinhle laughed softly. If it was, you wouldn't still be here. Thabo exhaled sharply, shaking his head. We can't do this again. Zinhle stepped in front of him, her gaze locking onto his. We'll see. And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving him standing there, drowning in his guilt. But she knew the truth. He would come back for more. They always did. Suspicion and lies. The next morning, Zinhle sat across from Zanele at their favorite cafe. Zanele sipped her tea, her brows furrowed in thought. Thabo has been acting strange lately. Zinhle lifted her cup to her lips, hiding her smirk. Oh. Zanele sighed, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. Yeah. He seems distracted. Distant. Like his mind is somewhere else. Zinhle shrugged. Maybe he's just stressed. Zanele nodded slowly. Maybe. But there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. And for the first time, Zinhle wondered if she had underestimated her sister. An addiction he can't fight. Days passed, and Thabo tried to avoid her. He ignored her texts. Stopped taking her calls. But Zinhle wasn't worried. Because one night, just as she was about to fall asleep, her phone buzzed. She reached for it lazily, glancing at the screen. Thabo, I need to see you. A slow, satisfied smile curled her lips. She knew he couldn't resist. And this was only the beginning. A dangerous obsession. Thabo paced the length of his apartment, his mind in turmoil. He had tried so damn hard, to resist. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Zinhle. Her lips. Her touch. The way she looked at him like she knew she had him in the palm of her hand. He had ignored her calls. Blocked her number. Yet here he was, standing outside her apartment door at midnight, his fist hovering above the wood. Walk away. But he couldn't. Before he could change his mind, the door swung open. Zinhle stood there, dressed in nothing but a silk robe, her dark skin glowing in the dim light. A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. I knew you'd come. Thabo clenched his jaw. We need to talk. Zinhle stepped aside, allowing him in. As soon as the door clicked shut, she turned to him, arms crossed. You've been avoiding me. Thabo exhaled, running a hand down his face. Zinhle, this has to stop. Zinhle arched an eyebrow. Is that why you're here? To stop? She stepped closer, the scent of her perfume wrapping around him. Or is it because you can't? Thabo swallowed hard. This isn't right. Zinhle tilted her head, studying him. Then why are you shaking? He cursed under his breath, stepping back. I love Zanele. Zinhle let out a soft laugh. Oh, sweet Thabo. If that were true, you wouldn't be here. Thabo turned away, his hands clenched into fists. I don't want you, he admitted, his voice low. Zinhle walked up behind him, her fingers ghosting over his back. But you do. She stepped around him, her lips just inches from his. And you always will. Thabo's resolve snapped. With a growl of frustration, he grabbed her, his lips crashing against hers. Zinhle melted into him, her hands slipping under his shirt, nails grazing his skin. This wasn't just passion. This was war. A love in pieces. Zanele stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the gold earrings Thabo had gifted her on their one-year anniversary. She smiled, remembering how he had kissed her forehead that night, whispering, "You're my forever." But lately, forever felt uncertain. She had noticed the shift. The late-night excuses. The distracted glances. The way his kisses felt, forced. She shook her head, forcing the thoughts away. You're overthinking. Thabo loves you. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. And it was growing. The first crack. Days passed. Thabo distanced himself from Zinhle, throwing himself into his relationship with Zanele, desperate to erase his guilt. But it was useless. The more he pushed Zinhle away, the more she pulled him back. And Zanele noticed. She sat across from him at dinner, watching as he absently scrolled through his phone, barely touching his food. Thabo. He looked up, startled. Huh? Zanele folded her arms. Who is she? Thabo froze. What? Zanele's voice was calm, but her eyes burned with suspicion. You've been distant. Cold. Like your mind is somewhere else. So tell me, who is she? Thabo forced a laugh, shaking his head. Baby, come on. There's no one else. Zanele studied him for a long moment before nodding. Okay. But deep down, she knew. He was lying. Zinhle's next move. Zinhle sat on her bed, scrolling through her phone when an idea struck her. A wicked, brilliant idea. If Thabo wanted to play the good boyfriend, she would remind him why he kept coming back. With a smirk, she opened her camera, adjusting her silk robe so that just enough skin was visible. Click. She attached the photo to a message. Zinhle, miss me? Seconds later, her phone buzzed. Thabo, Zinhle, stop. Zinhle chuckled, typing back. Zinhle, tell me to stop when you mean it. The message was read. No response. She smirked. He's still mine. A shadow of truth. Zanele couldn't shake the feeling. Something was wrong. One evening, as Thabo showered, she reached for his phone. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it. She scrolled through his messages. Nothing. Her heart pounded. Maybe I was wrong. Then she opened his deleted messages. And there it was. The picture. Zinhle. Dressed in nothing but silk. Zanele felt the ground shift beneath her. Her hands clenched into fists. Betrayal. Rage. Heartbreak. It was her own twin sister. Her world shattered. And all that was left was revenge. Zanele's heart pounded in her chest. The betrayal sliced through her like a knife, burning deep and unrelenting. Her own twin sister. Her own boyfriend. She stared at the picture on Thabo's phone, Zinhle's half-bare body draped in silk, her smirk taunting. Zanele's hands trembled. They thought I wouldn't find out? A slow, deadly smile spread across her lips. They were about to learn who they had betrayed. The confrontation. Zinhle waltzed into her apartment, humming as she poured herself a glass of wine. She had won. Thabo was already hers. He just didn't know it yet. A knock at the door startled her. She smirked. Thabo, you just can't stay away, can you? She swung the door open. And froze. Zanele stood there, her dark eyes unreadable, her expression terrifyingly calm. Zanele, Zinhle said cautiously. What are you doing here? Zanele stepped inside, closing the door behind her. You tell me. Zinhle's fingers tightened around her wine glass. I don't know what you're talking about. Zanele chuckled, her voice cold. Let's not play games, sister. She pulled out her phone and held it up. Zinhle's picture stared back at her. Zinhle's smirk faltered. Zanele's lips curled. Caught in the act, darling? Zinhle set down her wine glass, folding her arms. So? What are you going to do? Cry. Scream? Beg him to choose you? Zanele laughed softly. Oh, no. That would be too easy. Zinhle arched a brow. Then what? Zanele leaned in, her voice a whisper. I'm going to make you pay. Zinhle's smirk returned. You wouldn't dare. Zanele tilted her head. Wouldn't I? Zinhle swallowed hard. For the first time. She was afraid. The fall of a queen. Thabo arrived at Zanele's apartment the next night, a bouquet of flowers in his hands. He was determined to fix things. He would prove his love. He knocked. The door swung open. Zanele stood there, her face unreadable. Baby, he began, holding up the flowers. She stepped aside. Come in. Thabo hesitated. Something was wrong. But he stepped inside anyway. The moment the door shut, Zanele turned to him, her eyes blazing. How long? Thabo stiffened. What? Zanele threw her phone onto the table. The picture flashed on the screen. Zinhle. Thabo's stomach dropped. Zanele's voice was ice. How long, Thabo? He opened his mouth. But no words came. Zanele let out a bitter laugh. That's what I thought. Thabo reached for her. Zanele, I swear. She stepped back. Don't touch me. His chest ached. I love you. Zanele's eyes glistened. She had wanted to believe him. But the truth was staring her in the face. You love both of us. Silence. Then. A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. Fine, she whispered. Then I'll let you have her. Thabo frowned. What? Zanele turned away. Go to her, Thabo. Be with her. His heart pounded. Zanele. She looked at him over her shoulder. But don't ever come back. Thabo's breath hitched. Regret slammed into him. He had lost her. For good. The taste of karma. Zinhle sat on her bed, awaiting Thabo's arrival. She had won. Zanele would hate her forever, sure. But she had Thabo. A knock at the door made her grin. She rushed to open it, already imagining their victory kiss. But it wasn't Thabo. It was Zanele. Zinhle's smirk faded. What do you want? Zanele held up her phone, pressing play. Thabo's voice filled the silence. I love you, Zanele. I don't want her. I want you. Zinhle's body went cold. Zanele tilted her head. You thought he was yours? Zinhle clenched her fists. You're lying. Zanele stepped closer, her voice venomous. He used you. Just like you tried to use him against me. Zinhle's world tilted. No. He. Zanele chuckled darkly. Enjoy your victory, sister. With that, she turned and walked away. Leaving Zinhle standing there, shattered. Alone. And defeated. The queen rises again. Months passed. Zanele thrived. She built herself anew. Stronger. Wiser. And when she walked into a room, heads turned. Thabo saw her once, across a crowded cafe. She looked radiant, her laughter effortless. She had moved on. Without him. Zinhle, too, had learned the taste of regret. She had lost not only her sister, but herself. And now, she was nothing but a shadow. Meanwhile, Zanele? She had risen. And she would never fall again.